Hi, I'm Warren, coming to you here from Livestreams Channel Thailand, and I'm introducing part one of a longer conversation that I recently had with Dr. William Waite to introduce a new mini-series that we're posting on the channel soon, taking the personal into the cultural, sort of a self and society segment that applies the lessons of live streams to events of the day. This is part one. There's more posts coming soon, so I just want to thank you in advance for watching, for commenting, and hopefully for subscribing to our channel. Take care. So hello, we're coming to you again from the Livestreams Channel Thailand on YouTube. My name's Warren Fryer, and this is Dr. William Waite. I would like to thank everyone who's been watching so far. Please keep your comments and your responses coming. This is where the rubber meets the road. So we're glad to know that you're there. I wanted to mention that we're still doing our Clubhouse session. It's 8 p.m. on the West Coast in the U.S. on Fridays, which means it's Saturday morning, 10 a.m. in Thailand, and GMT is 3 a.m. So, wherever you are on the planet, if you can work that out, or if you're just incredibly lucky, you can join us. I'm really excited about the next kind of series within the series that we're getting started on now, because it's a real application of all of the things that we've been talking about up to this point. The personal or the individual moving into the wider culture. So just to do a quick recap, particularly in video 1 and 4, gives a good idea of the streams, the quadrants that live streams is kind of is based on. The ways that we take in information, the 4 ways. Video 2 talks about creating the historical self-image, which some people call the ego, and the role of enculturation in that. And video 5 is about the present-centered self image. And so what we want to do now is just to look at how the present-centered self can move into, or does, exist in the real world, and what that does for you. So I think I'll let Dr. William explain what he would like to at this point.
Okay, well, as Warren mentioned, we've talked primarily about the individual, historically, how we become egos, or how we become self-images, and how, along with, as we live our lives, there's this present-centeredness that is always kind of underneath the images and the identities that come from the history. What we can say about this is this also happens to the culture at large. So in a way, we're kind of like all these historical images running around, relating to each other in an as-if manner, as if our historical identity is who we are, rather than this present-centered self that is actually living in the present moment. And our game is about, first of all, looking at the historical images and understanding that they are images and memories, and they have a life of their own, but they're not the present moment. They're brought into the present moment. And what we could say about culture is just a bigger event where we bring in these historical phenomena and then play them out with each other as if they were reality, because they feel like reality.
Episode 5, video 5, is really, if you haven't watched it recently, or if you haven't watched it at all, I recommend taking a look at that one, again, talking about the present-centered self versus the historical self-image, or not versus, but that's my hang-up. Through that process, and even through the process of making that 5th video, it became clearer to me. Some people view enculturation as these shackles that we got to break free from, and obviously other people are very comforted by that, by them, and we all have it, and it's necessary for being a human being. It's how we learn. It's how we develop an identity instead of just being the bundle of energy, the happy bundle of joy that's delivered at birth. So it's an essential tool, but it is a filter. And so if the tool is functioning and we understand it as a tool, or we observe it as a tool, then it doesn't have to trick us into thinking that that's exactly who we are and that's all we are. And that's why I think that this part of the series is so exciting for me, because it's kind of the so what. it's one of the payoffs. If you've been with us through the videos up to this point, you could come to the end of it all and say, well, so what? And that's what we're talking about today, or what we're starting to talk about today.
So the so what has to do with translating those structures into this social, cultural situation that we're living in today, which has some peculiarities, or some particular aspects that have opened up the game in ways for the whole world that I don't believe has happened in history. We are definitely a global experience, and COVID has allowed us in one way to experience something that's going on anyway, but we've been so isolated in our little cultural bubbles that we haven't had to deal with it. And now we're at the cusp of having to deal with it. I mean, one of the things, since I'm American, I can speak more towards America than I can from most other countries. What I've noticed in my relationship with Americans is how myopic they are to a large extent. I mean, I have conversations, and it's as if America was the only reality in the world, and everything is in terms of that culture, and it's so interesting to realize that that's 330 million out of 7 point something billion people on the planet, and how at least that culture has become so insulated that it believes itself to be independent of all these other folks that are living on the planet.
When we talk about it, or if we're looking at the culture kind of as a whole, as an organism, and the way that it moves, I would certainly agree. I mean, of course, there are people of all different kinds of opinions within that culture. But when you look at when you look at the kind of the whole package as an organism, it's really interesting, and for us, it's a really interesting perspective that we get because we're not living in the U.S. now. I remember last year, at kind of mid 2020, Thailand, where we live, was doing pretty well in the COVID game because they went into shutdowns pretty early. This culture already has a tradition of people wear masks when they have a cold or something like that. So there wasn't a lot of controversy around that. And at the time, we had a really long spell where there were no cases. Mm-hmm. And so I was chatting with a friend back in the U.S. On Facebook, and I was talking to him about these things. And to his credit, in the middle of the conversation, he stopped and said, I never really thought about it, that everyone else is also dealing with this pandemic. I mean, very intelligent guy, went to school with him, college graduate, professional. As I say, it was so interesting to me that he was able to stop in that moment and say, oh, I've been living in my bubble. You guys are also dealing with COVID.
Right, right. And how interesting it is that that stopping that he experienced, and as a therapist, this is the absolute necessity, or the necessary moment for people to, if you want to talk about healing, which I don't care for that nomenclature, but growth I like a little better, has to occur. I have to get to a neutral place, because if I don't, I'm stuck in that self-image. And I know who I am, and these are my values, and this is right and wrong, and this is reality, and this is unreality. I have to stop and say, wait a minute, what in the world is going on? What's happening? And what you did was offer this person the opportunity to stop by giving him some information that he didn't have. And I mean, this is the beauty that we as humans have together to be able to do. And what we're faced with are these old images and old identities that create these very rigid boundaries of what reality is, what right is, what wrong is, and the incredible gift of being able to have experienced different cultures is it ain't the same everywhere. You know, it's like we're sitting in Thailand and there's no problem with masks here. And part of that is because Thailand is an autocratic system, in which we can see from the West is a negative, and we need more freedom and more blah, blah, blah. And yet, here's a way where more control and more manipulation actually became a life affirming experience rather than a life negating experience.
I would like to inject at this point that as a guest of the magnanimous government of Thailand, the Kingdom of Thailand, in no way, shape, or form would I out of hand just level criticism at anyone who's been so kind to me. So sawadee ka.
Right.
But yeah, at the same time, one of the most valuable things for me about looking at this process, acknowledging the other, is that when I recognized or realized that that does not mean that I endorse any of the opinions, viewpoints, worldview necessarily of someone that, I mean, apparently, you know, on the surface, on the very surface level, over our common specieshood, I seem to have very sharp disagreements with.
Mm-hmm.
However, some of the exercises that William has introduced me to, we talk about kind of like sitting with another person in terms of their experience, in terms of you imagine their sensation to be like, or their worldview, or the things, you know, the things in their environment. Sitting with them on their own terms is one of the ways that helps me begin to move toward more compassion or more understanding. But it does not mean that I agree with any silly thing that that obviously wrong person might say. But it does change the way that I interact with them. Even talking, we talk about in the U.S. how the increasing polarization has made it difficult for people even to share our ideas or have a reasonable debate without it descending into kind of a sort of a gang mentality. You're either for us or against us, or, you know, I'm right and you're wrong. And it doesn't allow the opportunity to examine things more broadly and to suss things out. Like, you know, I have a feeling, I have a reaction, I go with it. When something contradicts it, I double down, I deepen into it, because that's how I define myself. That's how I know who I am. And this exercise is helping me, sometimes more, sometimes less, to kind of mitigate that reaction, because it's not a response, it's reaction.